My name is Emma, and I'm 29 years old now, living in a quiet suburb outside of Denver, Colorado. But this story, the one that changed everything about how I see family and what we truly owe to those who raised us, it all started when I was just 15 years old, standing behind a greasy diner counter in the middle of a Friday night rush, my hands raw and aching from scrubbing endless piles of dishes. I've always been the kind of person who feels physically uncomfortable when I owe anyone anything. Maybe it's because growing up in our modest two-story house on Maple Street, my parents, Susan and Robert, had this invisible ledger in their minds, this unspoken scoreboard where every single thing they did for us kids wasn't really free. Every meal my mother cooked, every ride my father gave us to school, every small favor or act of basic parenting, it all got filed away somewhere in their memories, ready to be pulled out months or even years later like an old receipt they'd been waiting for me to pay back. It made me feel like even the most basic parts of childhood, things that should have been given freely with love, were actually transactions I hadn't agreed to. And when you're a teenager trying to figure out who you are in this world, that feeling leaves a mark on your soul that never quite fades away. Money was always this complicated, thorny subject in our house. My parents weren't poor, not by any stretch. My mother worked as an office manager at a dental practice downtown, and my father had a steady job at the local utility company. They both had decent salaries, health insurance, retirement plans, all the markers of middle-class stability. But from the moment my younger brother Ethan was born, 3 years after me, everything in our family seemed to tilt in his direction. Like the whole house had been built on uneven ground and we were all slowly sliding toward him. Ethan was their golden child from day one. I remember being 3 years old, holding him for the first time in the hospital, this tiny red-faced bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. And even then, I could see it in my parents' eyes. The way they looked at him was different from how they'd ever looked at me. There was a softness there, an unconditional acceptance that I'd been searching for my whole short life and never found. As we grew older, the differences became impossible to ignore. Ethan got private soccer training with a coach who'd played professionally in Europe. He went to expensive summer camps where they taught things like leadership and confidence building. When he wanted the latest gaming console or designer clothes that all his friends were wearing, my parents never hesitated. The credit card came out, the purchase was made, and life went on without anyone mentioning the cost. For me, though, things were different. If I needed new shoes because mine had holes in them, the answer was always to wait until the next paycheck. If I wanted to join the school orchestra and needed to rent a violin, suddenly we needed to have a family meeting about financial responsibility. The message was clear as crystal, even if it was never spoken aloud. Ethan's wants were needs, but my needs were barely wants. So I did what I had to do. At 15, while Ethan was spending his weekends at tournaments or hanging out with friends at the mall, I was putting on my uniform at Rosie's Diner on Highway 6. It wasn't glamorous work. The floors were sticky no matter how much you mopped them. The kitchen was always too hot, and the customers could be demanding and rude, but it gave me something I desperately needed. My own money, and more importantly, my independence. I worked every shift they'd give me. Weekday evenings after school, doubles on Saturdays, Sunday morning brunches where families would come in after church and leave me $2 tips on $40 bills. My hands developed calluses from carrying heavy trays. My feet ached constantly from standing for hours. But every paycheck felt like freedom. Every dollar I earned was a tiny declaration of independence from the complicated web of guilt and obligation that filled our house. That job at Rosie's led to another at a local bookstore, then a position at a tutoring center where I helped younger kids with their homework. By the time I graduated high school, I had savings. Not a fortune, but enough to pay for my first year at the local community college without having to ask my parents for a single cent. I remember the look on my father's face when I told him I'd already paid my tuition. This mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was disappointment that he couldn't hold it over me later. He made some offhand comment about how I must think I'm better than everyone else because I didn't need their help. At the time, I forced a laugh and let it roll off my back, but his words stuck to me like burrs. Was I trying to be better than them? Or was I just trying to be free? College was where the divide between Ethan and me, between my parents' expectations and my reality, grew into a chasm so wide I couldn't see the other side anymore. While I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and a full course load, studying late into the night at the library because my apartment was too noisy, Ethan was on his journey of finding himself. This apparently meant dropping out of the expensive state university my parents had happily paid for after just 1 semester. He came home with vague explanations about how the professors didn't understand his vision, how the whole system was designed to crush creativity. My parents nodded sympathetically, rubbed his back, told him to take all the time he needed. They converted the basement into a studio apartment for him, complete with a new gaming setup and a mini fridge stocked with his favorite energy drinks. Over the next few years, Ethan worked a series of odd jobs, each one ending when he decided the management didn't appreciate his unique perspective or the work environment wasn't nurturing his growth. He'd work at a coffee shop for 3 months, then quit because the manager asked him to clean the espresso machine. He'd get hired at a retail store, then leave because folding clothes was beneath his potential. Each time, my parents had a ready excuse. "He's just sensitive," they'd say. "He's got so much potential, he just needs to find the right fit. You know how it is, Emma. He's not like you." That last part always stung the most. He's not like you. The implication was clear. I was the workhorse, the one who could handle anything, who didn't need support or understanding or soft landings. Ethan was delicate, special, requiring careful handling. I was expected to be made of tougher stuff. I started noticing patterns in how my achievements were received versus how Ethan's minimal efforts were celebrated. When I made the dean's list while working 30 hours a week, my mother mentioned it briefly at dinner between discussions of what Ethan might want to do next. When I got promoted to shift supervisor at my restaurant job, my father asked if that meant I'd be working even more hours, as if my success was somehow an inconvenience. But when Ethan managed to keep a job at a record store for 6 whole months, we had a special family dinner at his favorite steakhouse to celebrate his commitment and growth. When I was 24, everything changed. After years of grinding, of proving myself over and over again, I landed a position at a tech startup in Denver. It wasn't Google or Apple, but it was a real job with a real salary and real possibilities. The company developed project management software, and they needed someone who understood both the technical side and how to talk to clients. All those years of juggling multiple responsibilities had actually prepared me for something. I threw myself into the work with the same intensity I'd brought to everything else in my life. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I volunteered for the difficult projects that everyone else avoided. I studied coding in my spare time, took online courses in business development, networked at industry events even though small talk made me want to hide in the bathroom. Within a year, I wasn't just surviving at the job, I was excelling. My manager started pulling me into strategic planning meetings. The CEO knew my name. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible for someone like me. And that's when I started thinking about buying a house. It felt surreal at first, like playing pretend. Someone like me, who'd started working at 15 just to buy her own school supplies, couldn't possibly own property. But the more I looked into it, the more possible it became. I spent months researching neighborhoods, comparing mortgage rates, saving every penny I could for a down payment. I went to open houses on weekends, walking through other people's lives and imagining my own furniture in their spaces. Every showing felt like stepping into a dream. I'd run my hand along kitchen countertops and picture myself cooking dinner without roommates hovering nearby. I'd stand in empty bedrooms and imagine them filled with bookcases and plants and all the things I'd collected but never had proper space for. I'd sit on back porches and envision quiet mornings with coffee and a book, no one else's schedule to work around. The day I finally found my house, I knew it immediately. It was a modest 3-bedroom cottage in Lakewood, built in the 1950s with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed updating but had good bones. The backyard had a huge oak tree that reminded me of the one I used to climb as a kid back when things were simpler. The moment I walked through the front door, something in my chest unclenched. This could be mine. This could be home. The closing process was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Every document I signed felt momentous. Every step closer to ownership made my hands shake a little more. The day I got the keys, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at the house, unable to believe it was real. I'd done this. Without help, without handouts, without owing anyone anything. Just me and my own determination. I spent a week moving in, painting walls, arranging furniture, making the space truly mine. I hung pictures, organized my kitchen exactly how I wanted it, set up a home office in the spare bedroom. Every choice I made, from the color of the curtains to the placement of the couch, felt like a small act of independence. This was my space, purchased with my money, filled with my choices. I invited my parents and Ethan over for dinner on a Saturday evening. I'd planned everything carefully, cooking my mother's pot roast recipe, the one she'd made for special occasions when we were kids. I'd even bought wine, the kind my father pretended to know about but really just liked because it was expensive. I wanted to share this moment with them, to have them see what I'd accomplished and maybe, just maybe, be proud of me. That was my first mistake, thinking that showing them my success would somehow change the dynamic we'd lived with for so many years. The moment they walked through the door, I could see it in my mother's face. Her eyes swept over my living room, taking inventory of everything, calculating its worth. She wasn't happy for me. She was assessing, like an appraiser who'd been called in to value an estate. My father made a joke about me secretly winning the lottery, his voice carrying that edge that meant he was uncomfortable. He walked through my house with his hands in his pockets, making comments about property taxes and maintenance costs, as if he was trying to remind me of all the ways this could go wrong. Ethan barely said a word at first. He just wandered from room to room like he was casing the place, opening closets and peering into cabinets without asking. The only genuine reaction I got was from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who'd driven down from Fort Collins for the occasion. She kept grabbing my hands and telling me how proud she was, how impressed she was that I'd done this all on my own. Her warmth only highlighted the coldness from everyone else. When we finally sat down to eat, the comments started in earnest. "It's nice," my mother said, cutting into her pot roast with precise movements. "But don't you think it's a bit much for someone your age? Most people wait until they're married, until they have someone to share the responsibility with." "Yeah," Ethan chimed in, finally finding his voice. "You probably could have helped out with other things instead of splurging on this." His tone made it clear that by other things, he meant him. I remember putting my fork down slowly, the metal clicking against the ceramic plate louder than it should have been in the suddenly quiet room. "What other things?" I asked, even though I already knew where this was going. My mother gave me that look, the one she'd perfected over years of passive-aggressive family dinners. The one that said I should know exactly what she meant without her having to spell it out. "Your brother's been talking about going back to school," she said, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when she was trying to manipulate without seeming like she was manipulating. "But you know how expensive that is. We thought maybe, well, now that you have this big house and obviously you're doing so well, you could have chipped in a little to help him get a head start." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing go shallow. Not once in all my years of working, all my struggles to pay for my own education, had they offered to help. Not when I was eating ramen noodles for weeks because textbooks were expensive. Not when I had to miss social events because I was working. Not when I graduated with honors, despite everything. But now that I had something to show for all that effort, it was already being eyed as a resource for Ethan. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. "I worked for this," I said. "I haven't taken anything from you since I was 15. Why should I be expected to pay for Ethan's choices?" The air in my dining room grew thick with tension. My father's jaw clenched the way it did when he was about to say something cutting. "Family helps family," he muttered, not quite meeting my eyes. "That's what family does." Ethan looked at me like I'd personally reached into his chest and crushed his dreams. "But you have so much now," he said, gesturing around at my modest living room. "It's not fair that you get all this while I'm stuck living in mom and dad's basement." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Stuck, as if he hadn't chosen to drop out of school, to quit every job, to let our parents coddle him while he found himself. As if my success had somehow stolen something from him rather than being built from my own sweat and sacrifice. The rest of the dinner was strained, conversations stopping and starting like a car with a bad engine. My aunt tried to keep things light, asking about my job and complimenting the meal, but the damage was done. As they prepared to leave, my mother gave me a hug that felt more like a restraint than affection. She squeezed my shoulders and whispered in my ear, her breath hot against my skin. "Don't be selfish, Emma. We'll talk about this again." The threat in those words was clear. This wasn't over. I thought maybe it would blow over, that given some time to cool off, they'd realize how unreasonable they were being. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the pressure campaign began in earnest. It started with little comments dropped into every conversation like poisoned breadcrumbs. My mother would call to chat about her day, then casually mention, "Ethan's been looking at the community college catalog. Such a shame that finances are holding him back." Or she'd text me links to articles about successful people who helped their siblings, with captions like, "Interesting read." My father's approach was different but equally manipulative. He'd remind me of things from my childhood, grossly inflating their significance. "Remember when I taught you to ride a bike?" he'd say. Or remember when we drove you to that academic competition in middle school? As if these normal parental actions were extraordinary favors I'd never properly repaid. The worst part was how they'd rewritten history to suit their narrative. According to them, they'd sacrificed so much for me over the years, and this was my chance to finally give back. The fact that I'd been financially independent since I was a teenager seemed to have been erased from their memories. The reality that they'd poured thousands into Ethan's failed ventures while telling me to figure it out myself had conveniently disappeared. Then came the family gatherings where I'd become the villain in a story I didn't write. At my cousin's birthday party, relatives who'd previously congratulated me on my house were now giving me concerned looks and asking if everything was okay between me and my parents. My mother had clearly been making the rounds, sharing her version of events where I was the successful daughter who refused to help her struggling brother despite having more than enough. I tried defending myself at first, explaining that I'd worked for everything I had, that Ethan had been given opportunities he'd squandered, but I quickly realized it was pointless. My mother had gotten there first, painting a picture of me as cold and selfish, someone who'd forgotten where she came from. The fact that I'd never actually come from money, that I'd earned every cent, didn't fit the narrative she was selling. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after that disastrous dinner. I got a text from Ethan that simply said, "We need to talk. Come by." I should have known better. I should have realized it was an ambush. But some small part of me hoped that maybe he wanted to apologize, to acknowledge how unfair they'd been. When I arrived at my parents' house, they were all sitting at the kitchen table like a tribunal. Spread across the surface were papers, so many papers. College brochures, tuition breakdowns, loan applications, and in the center, a detailed payment plan. They'd actually created a spreadsheet showing how much I could reasonably contribute to Ethan's education over the next 4 years, broken down by month, including projections for my salary increases. I stood in the doorway looking at this bizarre display, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh or even an angry one. It was the kind of laugh that escapes when reality becomes so absurd that your brain doesn't know how else to process it. "You made a payment plan?" I asked. "For my money? For his education?" My mother's face went hard. "This isn't a joke, Emma. This is your brother's future we're talking about. If you cared about family, if you cared about anyone but yourself, you'd do this without us having to ask." And then Ethan, with absolutely no shame or self-awareness, said the words that finally broke something inside me. "I mean, it's not like you don't have the money. You bought a whole house. Why should you get to have all that while I'm stuck here? It's not fair." Fair. As if fairness had ever been a consideration in our family. As if it had been fair when I worked every weekend as a teenager while he played video games. As if it had been fair when they paid for his car while I took the bus. As if it had been fair when they celebrated his participation trophies while ignoring my actual achievements. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who were supposed to be my family, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. "I'm not giving you a single cent," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, and then I walked out. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they'd be angry for a while, maybe even stop talking to me, but that eventually we'd find some way to move forward. I underestimated how far they were willing to go. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened it, some part of me already knowing what I'd find inside. But seeing it in black and white legal language was still a shock that made my knees weak. My parents were suing me. My own parents. The claim was something called willful deprivation of necessary familial support causing emotional and financial damage to a dependent family member. They were claiming that by refusing to share my resources with Ethan, I was actively harming his future prospects and causing him severe emotional distress. The amount they were seeking was almost exactly what they'd calculated in their spreadsheet, plus additional damages for the emotional pain I'd supposedly inflicted on my brother by flaunting my success while he struggled. They'd actually found a lawyer willing to take this ridiculous case. Probably some ambulance chaser who saw dollar signs and didn't care about the family destruction left in his wake. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me, my coffee growing cold as I read it again and again. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of what had once been my family. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power, control, and their fundamental inability to see me as anything more than a resource to be exploited. The phone calls started almost immediately. My mother alternated between tearful guilt trips and angry accusations. "Emma, you're tearing this family apart. she'd sob. Is your pride really worth losing all of us? Then the next day, you've become someone I don't recognize. When did you become so cold? All we've ever done is love you. Love. The word felt like ash in my mouth. If this was love, I wanted no part of it. Ethan took to social media, posting vague but pointed status updates about family betrayal and how money changes people. Some people forget where they came from the moment they get a taste of success, he wrote, garnering dozens of sympathetic comments from people who had no idea what was really going on. Blood should be thicker than greed, another post read, complete with a broken heart emoji. My extended family began choosing sides without knowing the full story. Some relatives I'd been close to stopped returning my calls. Others reached out not to offer support, but to suggest that I should just pay something to keep the peace. Even a little bit would show you care. My cousin Michelle told me, "Is it really worth all this drama?" Yes, I wanted to scream. Yes, it's worth it, because this isn't about money. It's about the fact that I've been on my own since I was 15, that I've never asked them for anything, that I've built my life with my own hands while they poured everything into Ethan. It's about principles and boundaries and refusing to let them treat me like an ATM with abandonment issues. I had to hire a lawyer, an expense I resented even as I knew it was necessary. Patricia Winters was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in family law and had seen everything. When I explained the situation, she actually whistled low. In 30 years of practice, she said, "I've rarely seen anything quite this bold. Don't worry, we'll handle this." The legal process was a special kind of hell. Every document filed felt like another crack in the foundation of what had once been my family. Discovery requests meant turning over my financial records, proving that every dollar I had was earned honestly, without family support. It meant documenting years of my work history while Ethan's sporadic employment was presented as evidence of his struggle to launch. The emotional toll was even worse than the financial one. I found myself second-guessing every interaction I'd had with my family. Had there been signs I'd missed? Had they always seen me this way, as someone whose only value was what I could provide? I'd lie awake at night replaying conversations from years past, looking for the moment when I'd become not their daughters, but their potential cash cow. Work became my refuge, the one place where my worth wasn't measured by what I could give to others, but by what I could achieve. Threw myself into a major project, leading a team developing a new software feature that could revolutionize how our clients manage their workflows. The long hours were a blessing, keeping my mind occupied with code and client meetings instead of legal documents and family betrayal. My boss, Jonathan, noticed the change in me. "You're doing exceptional work," he told me during a one-on-one meeting. "But you look exhausted. Everything okay?" I gave him an abbreviated version of what was happening, and his expression grew thoughtful. "You know what? I think it's time we talked about that senior developer position. You've more than earned it." The promotion came with a substantial raise and more responsibilities. I should have been thrilled, but all I could think about was how my family would see this as more evidence that I had money to spare. Still, I accepted, because I'd be damned if I let their greed dim my ambition. Meanwhile, my lawyer was building our defense and finding interesting things in the process. Patricia called me one evening, excitement in her voice. "You're not going to believe what I found in Discovery," she said. "Your parents' lawyer made a mistake. They accidentally included internal emails in a document dump. The emails were damning. In one, my mother had written to their lawyer, 'We need to make sure Emma's house is included in any settlement. Ethan has already been in touch with a realtor friend who can handle the sale quickly once it's transferred to his name. This is the cleanest way to ensure he gets what he deserves for all the years of Emma's selfishness.' There it was, in writing. They weren't just after money for Ethan's education. They wanted my house. The home I'd worked so hard for, the symbol of my independence. They were already planning to take it and sell it. And the mention of years of selfishness, as if my crime had been taking care of myself when no one else would. Patricia also found records showing that my parents had previously tried something similar with other relatives. Years ago, they'd pressured my late grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Dorothy, to sell them property at far below market value, claiming family hardship. It had caused a rift that lasted until Dorothy's death. There was a pattern here, one that made my stomach turn. Armed with this information, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to expose them. Not out of revenge, but because sunshine was the best disinfectant and their manipulation had thrived in darkness for too long. I started by reaching out to neutral family members, the ones who hadn't taken sides yet. I shared the emails, the payment plans, the evidence of past manipulations. Didn't editorialize or plead my case. I just presented facts and let them draw their own conclusions. The tide began to turn slowly. Relatives who'd been cold started reaching out, expressing shock at what they were seeing. My Aunt Linda became my fiercest advocate. She started sharing her own stories about my parents' behavior over the years, things she'd kept quiet about to keep the peace. Like how they'd guilt-tripped her into paying for Ethan's soccer camp one year by claiming poverty, only to take a vacation to Hawaii the next month. Or how they'd borrowed money from multiple family members for Ethan's needs and never paid it back. The pre-trial conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in September. I dressed carefully, choosing a professional but understated outfit. I wanted to look successful but not flashy, competent but not cold. Patricia met me outside the courthouse, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Remember," she said, "we have truth on our side. That's more powerful than their manipulation." Walking into that conference room and seeing my parents and Ethan sitting there was surreal. My mother was wearing her best dress, the one she saved for church and important occasions, as if dressing up could make their case more legitimate. My father looked uncomfortable in his suit, fidgeting with his tie, and Ethan, he lounged in his chair like he was already counting the money he'd get from me. The mediator was an older man with kind eyes who'd probably seen every type of family dispute imaginable. He began with standard pleasantries, then asked my lawyer to present our position first. Patricia was brilliant. She laid out my history of financial independence since age 15, complete with tax records and employment verification. She showed that not a single cent of my success had come from family support. She presented receipts, bank statements, proof that I'd paid my own way through everything. Then came the crucial moment. "And here," Patricia said, sliding a thin folder across the table, "is an email from the plaintiffs to their counsel confirming that this lawsuit's primary goal is to obtain my client's house for transfer to another party, not to fund education as claimed." My mother's face went white so fast I thought she might faint. My father's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. Ethan sat forward, craning to read the email, his casual confidence evaporating. Their lawyer's face went tight, and I could see him calculating how badly this damaged their case. Patricia wasn't done. She pressed a button on her laptop, and Ethan's voice filled the room. It was a recording, legally obtained in a public space, of him bragging to friends at a bar. "No, man, Mom and Dad are making it happen," his recorded voice said. "Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and be set for years." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the distant sound of traffic outside. The mediator cleared his throat and looked at their lawyer. "Do you wish to respond?" Their lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently with my parents. My mother was shaking her head rapidly, her carefully styled hair coming loose. My father's face was red, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Ethan just looked stunned, like he couldn't believe we'd actually fought back. Finally, their lawyer straightened up. "We'd like to request a recess to discuss this privately." They left the room, and I sat there with Patricia, my hands folded carefully in my lap. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, hollowed out. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and we were sitting in a sterile conference room fighting over money and houses and years of resentment. 20 minutes later, they came back. Their lawyer spoke carefully, his words measured. "We're willing to withdraw the lawsuit with each party covering their own legal fees." Patricia didn't even look at me before responding. "That's unacceptable. Given the clear evidence of malicious intent and the frivolous nature of this lawsuit, we require a written apology acknowledging the false claims, a public retraction of any statements made against my client, and full reimbursement of her legal costs." Ethan's head snapped toward our parents. "We're not apologizing for anything," he started, but my mother cut him off. "Yes, we are," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. And that was it. In that moment, they caved completely. The papers were drawn up, the apology letter crafted with language that made it clear they'd been wrong to sue me, wrong to claim I owed them anything. The check for my legal fees cleared within days. But the real satisfaction came from what happened next. I sent copies of the apology letter and the key evidence to every family member who'd been fed their lies. No commentary, no gloating, just the documents speaking for themselves. The family group chat that I'd been quietly removed from months earlier exploded. Screenshots of the apology letter circulated. The recording of Ethan bragging about selling my house went viral within our extended family. For the first time in my life, the truth was louder than their manipulation. The fallout was swift and brutal. My parents, who had spent years cultivating an image as the self-sacrificing parents with the successful daughter who'd abandoned them, found themselves exposed. Family gatherings they'd once dominated became minefields of awkward questions and cold shoulders. The cousins' birthday parties, the holiday dinners, the casual Sunday lunches, suddenly they were the ones not invited or sitting alone at the end of the table. My mother tried damage control, calling relatives with new versions of the story, each one painting her as the victim of a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too clear, the pattern too established. Even those who wanted to stay neutral couldn't ignore what they'd seen in black and white. Ethan took it the hardest. His friends, the ones he'd bragged to about getting my house, started distancing themselves. The social media posts that had once garnered sympathy now attracted mockery. Someone even created a meme from his recorded words that circulated among people who knew us. He lasted 6 weeks before the reality of rent and utilities sent him back home. The last I heard, he was working part-time at a shipping warehouse, the kind of job he'd once considered beneath him. My parents aged years and months. The stress, my father, not because I was, you were the house I've updated. Sometimes I sit on my back porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, and I think about how different my life could have been. If I'd given in, if I'd let guilt and manipulation win, Ethan would probably be living here now. The house would be sold, the money gone to fund another one of his failed ventures. I'd be back to scraping by, working multiple jobs to recover what I'd lost, while my family found new ways to make me responsible for their choices. Instead, I have boundaries. I have peace. I have a life built on my own terms. The check they sent me covered every cent of my legal fees, but it was the apology letter I kept. Not because I needed their validation, I'd long since stopped looking for that. I kept it as a reminder. A reminder that standing up for yourself isn't selfish no matter what anyone says. That family isn't about blood, it's about respect. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behaviors. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I think about calling them. Not to reconcile, but to check in, to see if they've learned anything from all of this. But then I remember my mother's whispered threat at that first dinner, "Don't be selfish, Emma, we'll talk about this again." And I know that in their minds, I'm still the villain of the story. I'm still the daughter who chose her own success over family loyalty. But here's what they never understood. I didn't choose success over family. They chose greed over me. They looked at their 15-year-old daughter working weekend shifts and saw not a child who needed support, but someone who didn't require their investment. They looked at their adult daughter's hard-won achievements and saw not a source of pride, but a resource to be mined. I've made peace with being the villain in their story because I'm the hero in mine. Every morning when I wake up in my own house, make coffee in my own kitchen, and drive to a job I earned through my own efforts, I'm living proof that you can break free from toxic patterns, that you don't have to accept the role your family assigns you, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to say no and mean it. My Aunt Linda still visits regularly. She brings her homemade cookies and we sit at my kitchen table, the same one where I first read that lawsuit, and we talk about everything and nothing. She told me once that she was proud of me, not just for what I'd achieved, but for having the courage to achieve it without them. That's the hardest thing, she said, building a life when the people who should be your foundation are trying to be your wrecking ball. I'm approaching 30 now, and my life looks nothing like I imagined it would when I was that exhausted teenager scrubbing dishes at Rosie's Diner. I thought success would mean finally earning my parents' approval, finally being enough in their eyes. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, accumulated enough, they'd see me the way they saw Ethan, with softness and unconditional acceptance. But I learned something more valuable than their approval. I learned that some people will only value you for what you can give them, and the moment you stop giving, you cease to exist in any meaningful way to them. I learned that family can be the ones who hurt you the deepest because they know exactly where to aim. I learned that sometimes love looks like walking away, like refusing to participate in dysfunction even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. My house is peaceful now. I've painted the walls colors that make me happy, filled the rooms with furniture I chose, created a space that reflects who I am rather than who I was expected to be. Friends come over for dinner parties where no one keeps score of who brought what or calculates what they're owed. I date people who understand that partnership means building together, not taking from each other. I've created a chosen family of colleagues, friends, and mentors who celebrate my successes without seeing them as their opportunity. Sometimes I drive past my parents' house, that 2-story on Maple Street where I learned that love came with conditions and receipts. The paint is peeling now, the garden my mother once tended with such pride overgrown with weeds. Their car is older, showing rust around the edges. The house looks tired, like it's carrying the weight of all those years of keeping score, all those calculated kindnesses that were never really kind. I don't stop. I don't knock on the door or peer through the windows. I just drive by, a ghost of the daughter they used to have, the one they traded for a lawsuit and a chance at easy money. And I go home, to my own house, where the foundation is solid because I built it myself, where the walls don't echo with guilt and manipulation, where I can finally breathe. This house will never have their names on the deed. It will never be collateral for Ethan's dreams or my parents' retirement plans. It's mine, earned with every blister from those restaurant jobs, every late night studying by lamplight, every promotion fought for and won. It's proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well despite those who try to drag you down. And when young people ask me for advice, when they share their own stories of family who see them as ATMs or safety nets, rather than human beings deserving of respect, I tell them this: your worth isn't measured by what you can provide to others. Your success doesn't obligate you to fund someone else's failures. And sometimes the most powerful word in any language is no, said firmly, meant completely, and never taken back. Because at the end of the day, when the lawsuits are settled and the family gossip dies down and the guilt trips lose their power, you're left with the life you've built. Make sure it's one you can be proud of. Make sure it's one that honors your struggles and celebrates your victories. Make sure it's one where you can look in the mirror and see someone who refused to be diminished, who chose self-respect over false harmony, who understood that real love doesn't come with a price tag or a payment plan. My name is Emma. I'm 29 years old. I've been financially independent since I was 15. I've never taken a cent from my family, and I never will. This is my house, my life, my story. And no matter what anyone says, no matter what names they call me or stories they tell, I know the truth. I didn't abandon my family. I simply refused to let them abandon me first, one transaction at a time, until there was nothing left of me but an empty wallet and a broken spirit. And that refusal, that stubborn insistence on being seen as more than a resource to be extracted, that's the foundation everything else is built on. It's stronger than blood, more reliable than family loyalty, more valuable than any inheritance. It's mine, and it's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. The seasons have changed twice since the lawsuit ended, and with each passing month, I've discovered new layers of what freedom really means. It's in the small things, the daily choices that would have once been scrutinized and judged. Like the morning I decided to repaint my bedroom a deep, calming blue, a color my mother would have called depressing, but that makes me feel like I'm sleeping inside a peaceful dream. Or the afternoon I spent $300 on plants for my garden without calculating how that money could have gone to someone else's needs. I've started hosting Sunday dinners, but these are nothing like the tense affairs of my childhood. My friends arrive with wine and laughter, not scorecards and subtle accusations. We cook together, making a mess of my kitchen, trying new recipes from the cooking classes I've been taking downtown. There's a freedom in knowing that every dish served, every glass poured, is given freely without expectation of repayment. Dr. Martinez helped me understand something crucial during our sessions. She explained that in families like mine, there's often one child designated as the keeper of stability, the one who must never falter, never need, never take up space. "That was you, Emma," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You were parentified before you even knew what that meant. You were managing their emotions, their expectations, their financial anxieties, all while you were still a child yourself." I remember one session where I broke down completely, sobbing in her office as memories I'd buried came flooding back. Like the time I was 8 and had strep throat, burning with fever, and my mother told me to keep quiet because Ethan was trying to nap. Or when I was 12 and won a state writing competition, but we couldn't attend the award ceremony because it conflicted with Ethan's soccer practice. Not even an important game, just practice. These weren't dramatic abuses that would make headlines, just 1,000 tiny cuts that bled me dry over years. The tech job has evolved into something I never expected. I'm now leading a team of 12 developers, working on projects that actually make a difference in how small businesses manage their operations. Every morning when I walk into our bright, open office space, I feel a surge of pride that has nothing to do with the salary. Though that's nice too. It's about building something meaningful with people who respect my contributions. Last month, one of my junior developers, a young woman named Priya, who reminds me of myself at that age, stayed late working on a problem. I found her at her desk, frustrated and near tears. Hey, I said, pulling up a chair. Let's figure this out together. We spent 2 hours debugging code, and when we finally solved it, she looked at me with such gratitude. My parents think I'm wasting my time with this tech stuff, she admitted. They want me to do something more traditional. I told her what I wish someone had told me at her age, that building your own path isn't a waste. It's the only way to ensure you end up somewhere you actually want to be. I've been dating someone for the past 6 months. His name is David, and he's a landscape architect who understands the value of building something from the ground up. We met at a coffee shop where I was reviewing code, and he was sketching garden designs. He asked about my work, genuinely interested in the technical details most people find boring. When I eventually told him about my family, about the lawsuit, and everything that led to it, he listened without trying to fix it or minimize it. That must have been incredibly painful, he said. How brave of you to choose yourself. He's met Aunt Linda, who immediately adopted him into our tiny chosen family. She teaches him her cookie recipes while interrogating him about his intentions. But it's all done with love and laughter, not manipulation disguised as concern. This is how family should feel, I realized, watching them joke together in my kitchen. Easy, warm, without hidden agendas or mental mathematics. The strangest part of this new life is how often I encounter others with similar stories. At a conference last month, I was having drinks with colleagues when somehow the conversation turned to family dynamics. One by one, people shared their own experiences of being the family ATM, the stable one expected to prop up everyone else. A senior architect from Chicago talked about how his siblings still expected him to fund their lifestyles 20 years into his career. A project manager from Seattle described cutting off her parents after they tried to claim ownership of a startup she'd built. We weren't broken by these experiences, we were forged by them, made stronger and more self-reliant. I've started volunteering with a financial literacy program for teenagers, teaching kids from backgrounds like mine how to manage money, build credit, and plan for their futures. Last week, a 17-year-old girl stayed after class, nervously fidgeting with her notebook. My mom takes half my paycheck for household expenses, she said quietly, but my brother doesn't have to contribute anything from his job. Is that normal? Spent an hour with her, not telling her what to do, but helping her understand her options, her rights, her worth beyond what she could contribute to others. I gave her my email, told her she could reach out anytime. Sometimes we just need someone to confirm that what we're feeling is valid. The holidays are still complicated. Last Christmas, I received a card from my parents, generic and store-bought, signed simply, Mom and Dad. No personal message, no attempt at reconciliation, just their names like a formal business correspondence. I stared at it for a long time, waiting to feel something, anger, sadness, longing, but all I felt was a kind of distant pity. They were still stuck in their patterns, still unable to see me as anything more than the daughter who wouldn't pay. I created my own traditions instead. Christmas Eve with Aunt Linda, making cookies and watching old movies. Christmas Day, volunteering at a shelter, serving meals to people who understood what it meant to have nothing and build from there. New Year's Eve with friends, toasting to futures we're creating rather than pasts we're escaping. These celebrations don't come with guilt or calculations, just joy and presence and the freedom to give what I choose to give. Sometimes I wonder about Ethan, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of detached curiosity. Did he ever realize that our parents' favoritism had crippled him as much as it had burdened me? While I was learning to stand on my own feet, he was being taught that others would always catch him when he fell. While I was building resilience with every dish washed and every dollar saved, he was being wrapped in cotton wool that looked like love but was really limitation. We were both victims of our parents' dysfunction, just in different ways. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him recently, still living at home, still cycling through jobs, still waiting for his big break to arrive without effort. He's 30 now, the age where potential starts to curdle into regret. I don't wish him ill. I hope someday he finds the strength to build something real, something earned rather than given. But I also know that's a journey he has to choose for himself. And nothing I could have given him would have substituted for that choice. The house has become more than just a symbol now. It's a living space that evolves with me. I converted one bedroom into a proper office, with built-in bookshelves and a desk positioned to catch the morning light. The other spare room is a guest space where friends can stay, where Priya crashed for a week when her apartment flooded, where Aunt Linda sleeps when she visits from Fort Collins. It's a home that shelters others by choice, not obligation. Last week, I refinanced the mortgage, getting a better rate that will save me thousands over the life of the loan. As I signed the papers, I thought about how my parents would have seen this. Another example of my selfishness, saving money that could have gone to family. But I've learned to reframe these thoughts. It's not selfish to secure your own future. It's not cruel to build a foundation that can support not just survival, but actual thriving. It's what everyone deserves, even if not everyone chooses to work for it. The promotion to team lead came with an unexpected perk. The company pays for continuing education. I'm taking evening classes now, working toward an MBA that will open even more doors. Sometimes I'm the oldest person in the classroom, surrounded by fresh graduates who've never had to choose between textbooks and groceries. But I don't feel behind. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every hard choice has given me a clarity they're still developing. I know exactly why I'm there and what I want to achieve. David asked me the other day if I ever regret how things ended with my family. We were working in the garden together, planting tomatoes that won't bear fruit for months, an act of faith in the future. I thought about his question while pressing seeds into soil. I regret that they couldn't see me as a whole person, I finally said. I regret that they chose greed over growth, but I don't regret choosing myself. I couldn't have become who I am if I'd stayed who they needed me to be. He nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. That's what healthy relationships look like, I've learned. People who accept your boundaries without testing them, who celebrate your growth without trying to claim credit for it, who love you without keeping score. I still have the recording of Ethan bragging about selling my house. Not because I need to remind myself of their betrayal, but because sometimes on difficult days when the old voices creep in telling me I'm selfish, telling me family should come first no matter what, I need to remember what was really at stake. It wasn't just money or property. It was my autonomy, my right to exist as an independent person rather than an extension of their needs. The financial literacy program has grown. What started as a few teenagers in a community center classroom has expanded to 3 locations, with a waiting list for each session. Local businesses have started sponsoring supplies and guest speakers. Last month, a girl who'd attended my first class 2 years ago sent me an email. She'd just been accepted to college with a full scholarship, and she'd saved enough from her jobs to cover what financial aid didn't. "You taught me that I deserve to invest in myself," she wrote. "Thank you for showing me it was possible. These are the moments that fill the spaces where family approval might have lived." Every young person who learns they can break cycles, every colleague who finds their voice in a meeting, every friend who knows they can show up at my door without calculating what they owe me for the shelter. This is the family I've built, not bound by blood, but by mutual respect and genuine care. The house is paid off in 15 more years if I stick to the current payment schedule, but I'm considering paying it off faster. Not because I have to, but because I can. Because every payment is a choice I make for my own security. My parents would call it showing off. I call it showing up for myself, consistently, reliably, the way they never did. Sometimes I imagine a different timeline, one where my parents saw my first paycheck at 15 and felt proud instead of entitled, where they celebrated my independence instead of resenting it, where Ethan was taught to stand alongside me instead of expecting me to carry him. In that timeline, maybe we'd have Sunday dinners that weren't battlegrounds. Maybe I'd have photos on my walls of family gatherings that made me smile instead of cringe. Maybe love wouldn't have come with a price tag. But that's not the timeline I live in. In this one, I had to learn that love isn't measured in dollars given or taken. That family isn't about blood, but about behavior. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is build a life that doesn't include the people who were supposed to be your foundation, but chose to be your quicksand instead. My name is Emma. I'm 29 years old, almost 30. I've been financially independent since I was 15, emotionally independent since 24, and truly free since the day I refused to let my family sell my future for their comfort. This house, with its blue bedroom walls and thriving garden, with its spare rooms that shelter friends and its kitchen that hosts chosen family, this house is more than property. It's proof that you can build something beautiful from the rubble of other people's expectations. And every morning when I wake up here, make my coffee, and face a day filled with work I chose and people who see me as more than a resource, I know the truth. The lawsuit wasn't the end of my family. It was the beginning of my life. Life where love doesn't require payment plans, where success doesn't demand apology, where the only person I need to make proud is the 15-year-old girl who stood behind a diner counter and dared to dream of something more. She would be so proud of who we've become. And that's worth more than any inheritance, any approval, any family that would rather sue you than celebrate you. That's worth everything. The other day, I drove past Rosie's Diner where it all began. It's under new management now, renovated with modern fixtures and an updated menu, but the booth where I used to take my breaks is still there. I went inside, ordered coffee and pie, and sat in that same booth, remembering the girl who counted every tip, who calculated how many hours she needed to work to afford textbooks, who dreamed of a day when she wouldn't have to check her bank balance before buying groceries. The coffee tastes different now, better quality beans, but I can still summon the memory of those endless refills I'd drink to stay awake for double shifts. My hands, once raw from dishwater and rough from carrying heavy trays, now type code and sign contracts. The girl who served tables in this booth would be amazed to know that one day she'd be the one leaving generous tips, remembering what it felt like to depend on the kindness of strangers. As I sat there, a young server approached to refill my coffee. She looked exhausted, that particular kind of tired that comes from being on your feet all day while worrying about bills. Her name tag said Ashley. She couldn't have been more than 17. I saw myself in her tired eyes, in the way she counted change carefully, in the notebook peeking out of her apron pocket, probably full of shift schedules and budget calculations. When I left, I paid my $12 check with a $100 bill and told her to keep the change. Her eyes went wide and she started to stammer that I must have made a mistake. No mistake, I said. I used to work here. I know how hard it is. She clutched that money like I'd handed her a lifeline, and maybe I had. Sometimes that's all we can do, reach back and offer a hand to someone else climbing the same steep path we once traveled. That's the thing about building your own life from scratch. You never forget what the materials cost. Every brick laid with exhaustion, every foundation stone placed with determination, every wall raised with sheer stubborn refusal to give up. When people look at my house, my career, my life, they see the finished product. They don't see the teenage girl washing dishes until her hands bled. They don't see the college student choosing between lunch and bus fare. They don't see the young woman signing apartment leases with shaking hands, terrified but determined. But I see her. I carry her with me everywhere. She's in every meeting where I speak up confidently because she learned that staying quiet meant being overlooked. She's in every boundary I set because she learned that giving everything meant having nothing left. She's in every choice I make to help others find their own way because she remembers what it felt like to be told she was selfish for wanting something more than survival. The irony is that my parents were right about one thing. Money does change people, but not in the way they thought. Having financial security didn't make me selfish or cold or forgetful of where I came from. It made me generous in ways I couldn't afford to be before. It made me warm toward those who showed me genuine kindness. It made me remember exactly where I came from and determined to be the person I needed when I was struggling. I sponsor 2 teenagers through the financial literacy program now, covering their expenses so they can save everything they earn from their jobs. Mentor young women in tech who are told they don't belong. I keep my door open for friends who need a safe place to land while they figure out their next steps. This is what abundance really looks like. Not hoarding resources, but sharing them freely. Not from obligation, but from joy. My therapist, but for what in their story, my purpose was to serve as a resource for Ethan's dreams. My parents' retirement, their vision of what family means. In my story, my purpose is my own to define and redefine as I grow, and I am still growing. 30 is approaching fast, and with it comes new dreams. David and I talk about the future sometimes, about maybe getting married, about possibly having children someday. The thought terrifies me sometimes. What if I repeat the patterns? What if I unconsciously favor one child over another? What if I burden them with expectations they never asked for? But then I remember that awareness is the first step to breaking cycles. I know what not to do, which is its own kind of wisdom. I know that love shouldn't come with conditions, that children aren't investments expected to pay dividends, that family should be a source of support, not extraction. And I know that if I do have children, they'll grow up in this house that represents everything I learned about building a life on your own terms. The story isn't over. It continues with every choice I make, every boundary I hold, every person I help find their own path to independence. It continues in the young women I mentor who learn they don't have to apologize for their ambition. It continues in the teenagers who discover they're worth more than their earning potential. It continues in the quiet moments when I water my garden and remember that growth takes time, patience, and the courage to put down roots even when the soil seems inhospitable. My name is Emma. I'm 29 years old, soon to be 30. I've been financially independent since I was 15, not because I wanted to be, but because I had to be. I've built a life that my family tried to tear down, a home they tried to steal, a future they tried to claim. And in doing so, I discovered something they never expected: that the girl they overlooked, the daughter they saw as a resource rather than a person, was stronger than they ever imagined. Strong enough to stand alone, strong enough to build something lasting, strong enough to help others find their own strength, and strong enough to know that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let anyone make you small again. This is my house, this is my story, and this is just the beginning.